West Coast towns were built on mineral wealth discovered more than 100 years ago. Until recently, they had thriving communities and a character all their own. But a change in work practices has had just as devastating an effect on the towns as a drop in the ore price. Despite talk of a recovery in the industry's fortunes, the West Coast now faces a tough challenge, convincing workers and their families to live locally. David Riley reports from Queenstown.
It's where millions of tonnes of Tasmania's mineral resources are dug up. But ask the people of Queenstown and they'll tell you there's not much to show for it anymore.
The mines used to support the town so much, where now that's changed around and it seems and it feels like the town is more supporting the mine.
Around town, the empty shop fronts and the crumbling weatherboard homes tell the story of economic decline. They're the scars of a remote town that's had to survive on the boom-bust cycle of the resources industry. The local football ground too has seen better days. Football's been at the centre of community life since Queenstown's heyday, and the Oval was once home to 4 teams. The infamous gravel playing surface has a reputation for producing tough players, more than a few who've gone on to national fame. But the team's fortunes have followed those of the town itself.
20 years ago, it was a thriving football community. Each of the club rooms here were full, and each had their own followers and people knocking on the door to get into play. Where now we find we're down to 1 team in Queenstown, and as a club we find it difficult to attract the players. We just don't have the stock here of the players that we did in years gone by.
Since the minerals boom of the 1970s, Queenstown's population has shrunk by 2/3 to about 2,000. In the nearby towns of Zeehan and Rosebery, it's a similar story. But the problem isn't so much job losses, rather the changing lifestyle of workers. Every day, more and more mine workers are choosing to live away from the mines, often in the larger northwest centres of Devonport and Burnie. These drive-in, drive-out workers have earned the name seagulls, and as well as hurting the town's football fortunes, some believe they're fuelling the economic decline.
It's bad for businesses in the communities because they bring everything with them. Socially, it's also bad because they don't join the football club, the Rotary, the Lions Club. They don't involve themselves in the community because they haven't got the time. And also they export the wages. The wages go out of town.
Every day, just after shift changeover at the mine, a convoy of new model 4-wheel drives rumbles across town. Rod Granger lives the typical life of a drive-in, drive-out miner. 4 days a week he works as a truck driver at Mount Lyell. He supports a wife and stepdaughter who live 2 hours north in Burnie. $90 a week pays for a very small single dorm that's just a few hundred metres from the mine, with a bed, a television and a microwave. Like many drive-in, drive-out workers, he brings with him enough frozen meals to last the week. He says he enjoys the rugged lifestyle of the West Coast, but his wife isn't so keen.
She was down here for a little while and she liked it to a certain degree, but I don't think she went too much on the cold weather, and so that's why she's still up the coast and I'm down here.
Exodus is a common theme in Queenstown, but instead of resentment, many in the community can sympathise with those who've moved away. Simon Milgate works at the Renison mine near Zeehan, 40 kilometres away.
I work on a crew of 6 or 7 and there's 3 of those that are called seagulls, so I mean, I understand totally, but a lot of the locals don't really like it. I've got a camp just outside of Zeehan and a lot of them get bagged out for not even crossing the bridge to buy a newspaper.
He's chosen to live locally with family, but after several years here he can see why some move on.
Just with 2 young children and being wet and cold all the time, there's not a great deal to do for the kids, particularly in Zeehan.
Aside from the weather, he's unhappy about the lack of infrastructure, housing and services. Now he's thinking about becoming a seagull.
We've only got a doctor 2 or 3 days a week. We've got a 1 shop 2 service stations, but you've got to use your card. Just little things like that. There's just not much feel about it.
The West Coast Mayor Darryl Geraghty admits the region has an image problem. He says successive governments have neglected the West Coast, allowing infrastructure to become run down through lack of funding. The difference today, he says, is that mining companies aren't prepared to make up the difference.
The mines were part of the town. Originally they were part of the town, and they subsidised a great many things within the community. Those subsidies have been eroded.
He also blames the company's decision to roll out 12-hour shifts, 5 days on and 5 days off, for encouraging the seagull work culture.
I don't think they're taking it seriously enough. I think MMG is, because they've got an excellent manager over there, and he's cognizant of the community, but 1 or 2 mines here have both got fly-in, fly-out managers. Not setting a good example. But it's not only the mines, it's also the aquaculture industry. Some in the tourism industry are now starting to do 5 on, 5 off. So it's flowing through the community.
The council is desperate to reverse this trend, and it's promoting so-called royalties for regions, a scheme to redirect a greater share of state government mining levies back into local infrastructure. The state government's been lukewarm about it, saying revenue should be allocated based on need. The mining companies too are reluctant to accept a greater share of the burden.